consequences of extreme weather, as we have seen unfold in British Columbia. Housing affordability and mental health and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. This Liberal government has made a lot of promises, including some big ones in their first 100 days. But turning those promises into reality will require cooperation and the support of at least one opposition party in the House of Commons. This speech will serve as the building blocks for the future of this government and this country. This is the speech from the throne. You are looking live there at the Senate of Canada building right in downtown Ottawa on a chilly November day in the nation's capital. It is here where in the next hour, Governor General Mary Simon will deliver her first speech from the throne, as we said, laying out the government's priorities for the 44th Canadian Parliament. And if you hear bells behind me, it is because the Senate is calling senators, those who are here, to the chambers now to get their spots. A limited capacity inside the Senate chambers, again, because of the pandemic, but there will be some people present. And that is where people, VIPs, including the Prime Minister and, of course, the Governor General, will start to arrive in the next 15 to 20 minutes' time as we get the ceremony here underway. Nice to see you all this morning. I'm Rosemary Barton. Thank you for joining us. I am just a couple steps outside the chambers, which is why you get that lovely sound of the bells beckoning the senators into the chambers as well. Inside the Red Chamber is where Her Excellency will read the throne speech. Remember, the throne speech is written by the government, by the Prime Minister's office, setting the direction and goals for this session. It comes just about 2 months after September's federal election, so much of what we heard about during the election will be featured again in this speech. And of course, we know many of those priorities: pandemic recovery, whether it be the ongoing vaccination of the population, economic recovery, climate change, sure to be top of mind, particularly, of course, for people in British Columbia today. Making greater strides toward reconciliation. Mental health is a priority for this government as well, naming a mental health minister, and affordable housing. Hannah Thibodeau is outside, just outside the Senate of Canada building, where the people will start to arrive, the Prime Minister, the Governor General. Hannah, over to you.
Yeah, Rosie, well, this is where the beginning, outside the Senate, the pomp and ceremony starts, and you can hear them starting to play the music, the band off to the side, just kind of getting tuned up. Now, it's not as big as we've seen in the past. You and I have done these for quite some time. We've seen a lot of special guests, former prime ministers, former governors general, all of those type of special guests. But this time you won't see that. Only 35% of the Senate will have people in it. So they have capacity limits. We are in a better phase when it comes to the pandemic, but still there are restrictions. They want to keep that social distancing. We'll see the usher of the Black Rod come out. He'll meet the Prime Minister and the Governor General. The Prime Minister is supposed to be coming alone as well so that they can keep those capacity limits down, but we're not going to see those special guests that we have seen in the past, but we still will see a bit of the pomp and ceremony, in particular when it comes to a throne speech, Rosie.
Okay, Hannah, we will come back and talk to you as people start to arrive. This is our second throne speech with a pandemic, so we're a little bit more used to the fewer numbers, as Hannah was talking about there. But there is still all the pomp and ceremony that is expected on a day like today. It is, of course, sort of the official beginning of a session of Parliament, and it is, as we've been talking about, impacted by the pandemic. The old traditions, though, remain intact. They've tried to do their best to make everything look, as normal as it could be on a day like this. It is, in fact, the Governor General who opens this new session of Parliament. Like many parliamentary rituals dating back to Confederation, this ceremony is rich with tradition.
Usher of the Black Rod.
The procession begins with the Usher of the Black Rod, officially the Queen's messenger in Parliament. He travels from the Senate to the House of Commons with an invitation from the Governor General. Knocking 3 times on the Commons door with his black rod, a golden-tipped ebony cane.
This honorable House, attend her immediately.
He summons the MPs to the Senate to listen to the throne speech. The usher then returns back to the Red Chamber with a parade of MPs behind him. Now, because of the renovation on Parliament Hill, the two chambers are housed in separate buildings for at least the next decade, roughly 700 meters apart. So today, shuttle buses will carry a limited number of MPs between the temporary House of Commons on Parliament Hill's West Block, down 3 city blocks across a busy main street, to the new Senate of Canada building in what was originally Ottawa's central train station. Pandemic restrictions still in place means the chamber will be more empty than in past years. Those in attendance will be masked and invited guests are limited. So as you can see, some of the pomp and ceremony starting there outside with the arrival of various members of the Canadian Armed Forces who will be here to welcome the Governor General, acting as the Queen's representative and reading that speech on behalf of the Queen inside the Senate chambers. And of course, as you saw in those pictures, we have a new Governor General. The previous one, Judy Payette, left her job, and Mary Simon will be performing her first speech from the throne in English, a little bit in French, and some in Inuktitut as well. David Cochrane is inside the House of Commons in the West Block, where things sort of kick off before they move to where I am, David.
Yeah, Rosie, I can hear your bells ringing all the way up here in the West Block. They're quite loud. It was interesting looking at the logistics of a throne speech now and how easy it was when everybody was in the center block, right? They just walked down the hall and it happened lickety-split. It was like having main floor laundry, just so easy to get everything done. And now all of this logistical, difficulties brought in by the renovation and made further complicated by COVID, because you see these old traditions, the usher of the black rod, and of course, the Queen's representative reading this, and the new tradition of everybody being masked in close proximity in public spaces, certainly in indoor spaces. In terms of what we're going to expect today, Rosie, it's going to be a shorter speech. I think you and I have both heard this, that this will be substantially shorter than the last speech from the throne, maybe less than a half an hour. And don't expect to be blown away by big, bold new ideas. In fact, it's going to be a bit more like a Liberal greatest hits album, where they go back over a lot of the issues they campaigned on, their answer to the affordability crisis being things like movement on childcare. Ontario is close to signing a deal now with the federal government, we're hearing, and movement on housing. But the number one priority remains ending the fight against COVID and sowing the seeds for an economic recovery. And there's political tension on that on two fronts, Rosie. One is from the New Democrats, who are worried that some of the pandemic supports, in particular the CERB and direct income supports to individual Canadians, are going away too quickly and not being generous enough at a time of great need. And from the Conservatives, who argue that runaway government spending, in their words, is driving inflation and fueling the rising cost of goods here in Canada with an inflation rate the likes of which we haven't seen in nearly 20 years. So a modest and predictable, I think, agenda laid out in the throne speech today from the government, promising to move quickly and make good on their core election promises, and already seeing where the political tension is going to come, though, Rosie. I don't think in the short term there's going to be any difficulty for this government in passing some of its core pieces of legislation.
Yeah, although, David, we would expect, I think, to see some outreach, some signs of willingness to have cooperation, collaboration in the House. You would hope that would happen. Expect that to happen in this speech, too, but we will see. David, I'll come back to you in a little bit. Thank you so much. David is over there in the West Block. Of course, as we've been talking about all of this happening, of course, in the midst of a pandemic, well, a huge number of Canadians are double vaccinated now. And of course, children's vaccine for kids ages 5 to 12 has been delivered to this country, and vaccinations starting very soon for those kids as well. The fact remains that there are difficulties, and we can even feel them and see them today in terms of how the throne speech is being managed from a public health perspective. Dr. Christian Thompson is the president of Manitoba Doctors. He is an emergency medicine physician at St. Boniface Hospital in my hometown of Winnipeg. Nice to see you, Doctor.
Nice to see you. Thanks for having me, Rosemary.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I know St. Boniface well, too, so it's good to have you represent all those parts. So obviously, the country is still grappling with the pandemic, but it would seem that perhaps getting kids vaccinated is going to be a pretty big step in the right direction. Certainly, we have seen that a lot of kids it was more children getting infected than adults at this stage, if only because of the vaccination rates.
Right, so it's an extremely important step. We know that the vaccines are safe and effective. And so I'm very glad that this is happening. We really need to, increase our vaccination rates so that we can see our way out of this pandemic. So it's very welcome news.
I know in your province in particular, it's not necessarily pandemic, but sort of the side effects of the pandemic that are causing problems in the healthcare system, delayed surgeries and that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, right now we're seeing 40% of physicians in a survey that Doctors Manitoba conducted say that they're feeling burnt out. Over 50% of physicians saying that they've experienced threats or violence. There are 136,000 Manitobans, that's 10% of our population, that are waiting for surgeries or diagnostic procedures. So if you're not, one of the 1 in 10 Manitobans that are waiting, you have a family member or a loved one that's waiting in pain, waiting in uncertainty or fear. So this is a staggering backlog that absolutely needs to be addressed.
And I would imagine that that's sort of replicating itself across the country because all the healthcare system is feeling the burden of things. What would you hope to hear from this speech today that would speak to, the pandemic recovery from a health point of view, but maybe a broader statement about the healthcare system and how it's coping?
Absolutely. The tone at the top matters. And from the tone at the top, there are echoes at the bottom. And what we really need to see is leadership that not only listens in word, but listens in deed. We need to see words translate into meaningful action. My term began in May. I've met with 3 different health ministers. Minister Gertsen, who was our acting premier for a time, Minister Stephenson, who is our current premier, and of course our current health minister, Gordon. And in these discussions, there's been lots of dialogue, but what we need to see today, and what we should have been seeing many days before, is these words being translated into meaningful action. So I'm hoping for that today.
Okay, Dr. Thompson, good of you to make the time. Wishing you all the best there in Manitoba. Manitoba also has its own throne speech later today, so we'll see whether some of those things get addressed locally as well. We know that one of the first orders of business for MPs, of course, and it already has been, there is a request by the NDP and the Conservatives for an emergency debate on the situation in British Columbia, the devastating floods, the mudslides, all of that. There is a hope that there can be a conversation inside the House of Commons as things get underway. And of course, as the province braces for more extreme weather this week.
Oh my God, look at that.
First fires and now catastrophic floods. The devastating impact of climate change is being felt across British Columbia. Premier John Horgan calling it once-in-a-century flooding. These gut-wrenching pictures are from just a week ago. Kathy Rennie survived a mudslide in Lillooet.
The whole side of the mountain come down and taking out these cars and everything just being swept away and just complete panic.
Thousands have been impacted by that record-breaking storm system. It endangered lives and decimated key infrastructure. Roads were washed away and crucial supply lines cut off. Pam and Paul Velt live in Merritt, and they watched in sheer horror as their home washed away.
It went under. The river just took it under and gone within seconds.
Merritt's entire population of over 7,000 people was put under an evacuation order. The local wastewater treatment plant was non-operational, all because of flooding. Peter Robb is the mayor of Hope. He told CBC News that dealing with this has been devastating, emotionally draining, but the community really stepped up.
Everybody's coming together and helping where they can.
So, of course, much of the country watching as things unfold in British Columbia, and the government, the Prime Minister promising to be there for the province as it rebuilds. And, of course, as we watch what happens in the days to come because of the weather there. Just a few moments ago, the Minister of National Defence, Anita Anand, gave an update on the situation in BC.
500 soldiers on the ground in British Columbia, thousands more ready to be deployed if necessary. We're working very well with the British Columbia government and all local partners to make sure that we're doing whatever is needed for the people of British Columbia. We have immediate response units across the country who are standing ready to be deployed if needed. Thank you.
What's the
So that's the Minister of National Defence on the latest in terms of the Canadian Armed Forces contribution. The government over the weekend also struck a supply chain working group with the province and many other industries to make sure that food and essential goods could get into the province. Spencer Coyne is the mayor of Princeton, BC, and he joins me now. Mayor, nice to see you. Appreciate you making the time.
Afternoon, I guess.
Yeah, almost afternoon. Yeah, you got up earlier for me. Thank you. So first of all, let me just start with how your town is doing. I understand that you had some access problems, but maybe that's improved.
We're hanging in there. I think that's the best I can say it today. We still have transportation issues, I could say. Highway 3 is intermittent. We lost it for a few hours yesterday. That's our route to the Lower Mainland. So it's still sketchy whether or not it's going to maintain its ability to stay open.
How important is that highway in terms of getting things into your town that you need?
It's important for the entire province at this point because it's the main artery to the Lower Mainland. So that's our main artery to all of our groceries. Everything that comes out of the Port of Vancouver is going through that highway right now, and we need it open no matter what.
I talked to the BC Minister of Agriculture on Sunday, and she said that she wasn't, at that stage anyway, concerned about goods, essential goods, that there would be enough for everybody. Do you have the same impression, or are you concerned about getting things that you need to your town?
So we ran out of groceries probably 24 hours into our flood. Our grocery store is overstocked right now, thank goodness. Mm-hmm. They did do redirection, but it came from Alberta, and then I believe some goods were apparently going through the United States up and around, but that's a long haul. Yeah. When we have a 3-hour route through here.
Yeah. What is your primary concern right now, Mayor, in terms of what your town needs? Are you worried about the weather that seems to be coming?
Yeah, the weather is it's snowing right now. I think there's about an inch of heavy snow out there right now. We got rain forecasted and +6 or 7 forecasted, and I'm really concerned about that. If it goes any higher and it starts melting up in the high country, then it's going to come down here. It's going to be devastating for not only ourselves, but Merritt and everybody on the other side of the mountains over on Hope side. And we can't keep up with this.
So obviously, while you're coping with all of this, we've got this big speech happening in Ottawa today. And obviously, we would expect the government to talk about climate change. I wonder what you would want to hear from them, because obviously you're thinking about the day-to-day there right now, I understand. But is there anything that would be helpful, reassuring to hear today?
I want to hear from the government of Canada that they're going to help fund this. If this is climate change, then we need federal help. We need, instead of the 80-20 split on the rebuild, we need the federal government to step up in a big way and help us. The amount of rebuilding just for our municipality, we're looking at probably 5 or 6 years worth of taxation just to cover the costs on this. We need them to step up. I mean, we're a resource community. The amount of money we put into the GDP of this country as to our per capita is staggering. We need that assistance, and we need them to put their money on the table and actually get it to us as soon as possible, not later. I don't want this 3 years down the road. We need this now. We need this now and in the spring. We need to rebuild.
Both the head of the military and the Minister of National Defense today said there were more troops that could come if needed, but certainly the head of the military didn't seem to think it was urgently needed. What is your sense of whether you need more people, more soldiers on the ground?
I've asked for military assistance. I've put out a request for labor. We're trying to get people's homes cleaned out so that they don't freeze up. In a couple of weeks, it's going to be December, and where we live in December, it drops to -20. January gets worse. We could be down to -40. We're not moving mud, and we're not moving people back into their homes if it's -40 and there's no heat, or if it's -20 and there's no heat. So we need that manpower. We physically do not have it here. The volunteers that are helping right now, are going to burn out at some point, and I need that assistance.
Mayor, you sound discouraged. Would that be fair to say?
Today's a hard day. I woke up this morning to a house fire in the community on top of everything else. We're what, 8 or 9 days into this now. It started Sunday, and every day there's another thing that we're dealing with. And at some point, sometimes I can say it feels like we're alone, and I think every mayor who's in this feels the same way at some point, that we're doing this alone in some capacity. I'm not saying the provincial government isn't there to help us. I'm not saying the federal government isn't there to help us, but there's a lot of bureaucracy between us and getting the assistance that we need, and we need that cut. This is winter, and we're flooding, and we need people to figure this out so our people can have some sense of normalcy this year.
Okay, Mayor. Well, I hope people were listening, because you gave a really impassioned plea there for your part of the country. We are thinking about you, so I hope you don't feel alone. I hope other governments reach out and help soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, take good care. Appreciate it. That is the Mayor of Princeton, BC, Spencer Coyne. Obviously, the immediate concern there, coping with the disaster and preparing for the potential of more flooding as we wait for the Prime Minister to arrive first and then the Governor General. That there on your screen is the usher of the Black Rod, Greg Peters, who will make his way over to the House of Commons to tell the Commons that it is time for the speech from the throne, and some of them will make their way over here to have a listen. I'll bring back David Cochran, who's over there in the West Block, where Greg Peters will make his way. Obviously, just, heart-wrenching to hear, David, from the mayor of one of those towns that has been touched, and a real fear about how the weather may turn on them, whether it be cold or ongoing floods and more precipitation over the next couple of days. But it also speaks to the broader issue of climate change and many people, talking about how it is possible that what we've seen in British Columbia could actually be an impetus for the government to work faster. You were with the Prime Minister when he went to COP26. How much of all of that do you think will be reflected today?
Well, yeah, I think climate change is going to be one of the main pillars, or fighting climate change is going to be one of the main pillars of this speech, along with the COVID recovery and issues like reconciliation in particular. I can't speak for what the government will do for the town of Princeton, but I think it would be a moral and political failure if there is not significant financial aid to help with the rebuilding. I remember years ago, Rosie, when I lived in St. John's, and Hurricane Igor hit Newfoundland and Labrador, Tropical Storm Igor, and devastated a lot of small communities. The federal government played a big role in the recovery there, because there's a system designed where Ottawa comes in and financially backstops this, so the mayor of Princeton doesn't have to use 5 to 6 years worth of taxation, or a province isn't financially hammered by the need to deal with a big crisis like this. But the challenge for the federal government going forward, Rosie, is just how many more of these extreme weather events are already baked into the atmosphere. Yeah. I mean, COP26 was about saving the 1.5 degree global warming target. And all of the plans fell short, even with the more urgent focus and aggressive approach by a lot of Western countries. You still have plans that fall short of getting it to that target. And I think the Prime Minister is arriving there now. The message he took to Glasgow in COP26 was that Canada is going to get serious about capping and reducing oil and gas emissions. And Canada is also trying to start the conversation on a global minimum price on carbon, which he feels is key to the international effort to dealing with this.
Yeah, and you're right. There is the Prime Minister arriving, being greeted by the usher of the Black Rod. The Prime Minister, as we said, on his own today, because we're trying to keep the numbers down for this second pandemic throne speech. The last one, of course, last year, as the government tried to reset its agenda before eventually plunging us into an election about a year later. All right. That's a nice way to be greeted on your way to work, isn't it? That's the Prime Minister now making his way inside the Senate. The Speaker's Parade is the next thing to watch for here. And once all that is done, the Governor General will also arrive. The Prime Minister being greeted by the Speaker of the Senate, George Fury. And of course, the Senate is where the activity happens today, where the throne speech is read in a chair that looks pretty much like a throne. That's why it's called that. David, in terms of, I think a lot of people sometimes look at a throne speech and want to know, well, when are they going to do this and when are they going to do that? That is not what this document is actually supposed to do. It's supposed to lay out a vision, a value statement sometimes, but also a vision that is very much guided by what the government said during the election campaign. But in terms of timelines, we have had some signals from the government in terms of legislation that it could get going on in these, I think, 4 weeks that it's sitting before the Christmas break, before the holiday break.
Yeah, there's really two tracks going on here, right? There are the words in the speech for the throne, which are aspirational, thematic, and directional, and then there's the legislative agenda that they're going to try to make some progress on between now and the 17th of December, I believe it is, when the House of Commons is scheduled to rise for the winter break. And anyway, we'll talk about that in a little bit because we have an arrival here. I think this might be Mary Simon, Rosie, I'm not recognizing the car, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it's got the Governor General flag on it, so you're right. That is the arrival of Her Excellency, the Governor General of Canada, Mary Simon. I had the pleasure of sitting down with her a couple weeks ago to talk about her job and how she's approaching it. A couple of the things that she wants to reflect in her job will be reflected in the throne speech, even though she is not in a political role. Climate change and reconciliation, two things that matter to Mary Simon and have throughout her career. This will be her first opportunity to present the throne speech for the government. We'll listen in here.
Cardinal, à l'épaule! Cardinal, à votre gouverneur général, salut royal, présentez!
Right, and that is the official welcome for the Governor General. And just because it was hard not to notice, yes, the Governor General of Canada has some purple in her hair. I asked her what that was about when I was talking to her a couple weeks ago. She told me it was because she found her gray hair boring. So she just put a little purple underneath. So you weren't imagining that. She's got a lot of personality, and that's how some of it is being demonstrated today. She will now make her way down here, David, to come into the House and come into the chamber, rather, and read the throne speech. She will read some in French, but she does not yet speak French. It's something, again, that she told me she is working on. I'm not sure whether this will become an issue again. It certainly was when she was appointed, but she will do her best to read some, at least in French, and of course in Inuktitut as well, David.
Yeah, Rosie, I also have some purple in my hair. I just can't pick it up on television right now. It's going to be interesting to see the reaction to that. I know that this was an issue, certainly in some of the Quebec newspapers, when Mary Simon was appointed, and the fact that she was bilingual, just not bilingual in Canada's official languages, and she did promise to work on that. And going back to our earlier conversation before the Governor General arrived at the Senate, we're talking about the legislative priorities of the government.
Yes.
One of the things they have in their priorities is strengthening official languages. And this was a priority and something that they ran on in the election. So I'd be curious to see if that is referenced in this speech, how much it is referenced, and how much of the speech she actually reads in French, and then what the reaction, particularly in some of the Quebec pundit class and journalism class, what the reaction to that will be.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, as I said, she said she's making efforts a couple times a week. We'll see whether that's enough to satisfy. Sometimes when you make an effort, that is already welcomed by people. But there has, of course, been that bit of a scandal around the head of Air Canada, having lived in Montreal for 13, 14 years, if I'm not mistaken, and decided that he didn't need to speak French in order to do that job. He quickly changed his tune after there was a lot of comments in Quebec about a company such as Air Canada having a CEO who does not speak French and didn't seem to think that he needed to. David, I'll come back to you. Thank you so much for all of that. You're looking at some pictures there from inside the House, the Senate, and this is lovely and something I know Canadians are getting used to seeing now because of Mary Simon. This is the quillic that is being lit just inside the chamber. The quillic is an Inuit tradition. It's made of soapstone and animal fat, and it is burned to bring light and warmth into the home. It's traditional light. And Elder Sally Webster, who was at the swearing in of the Governor General, is also here today and present. And she will sort of tend to the quillic through this ceremony. It's a beautiful piece of Inuit tradition to bring into the Senate because of the Governor General, of course. So as we were talking about there with David, we are expecting to hear a fair bit about climate change from the government. There was a lot of focus on it through COP26. A lot of questions, too, about the appointment of Stephen Guilbeault as Minister of the Environment and Jonathan Wilkinson moving from that portfolio to natural resources. Jada Cardinal-Duteuil is an 18-year-old climate activist who recently went to COP26, and she joins me from Edmonton today. Nice to see you, Jada. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Speaking of purple hair, wow, you and the Governor General.
No kidding.
There's something going on here I'm not hip enough to know about. Anyway, so I know you were at COP26. I know a lot of people left that event feeling a little discouraged. What was your state of mind when you left?
The same as everybody else, to be quite honest.
And why?
Yeah.
Why was that, Jada?
It did not feel nearly urgent enough for what needs to be happening. As you can see, in Canada, we are already dealing with some of the worst things that can and will happen in terms of natural disasters made worse by the climate crisis. And we don't have as much time as everyone else seems to think.
So what would you want to, I mean, you sort of know the government's position, and you certainly do after COP26. What would you want to hear today that would make a difference for you from this throne speech?
To be quite honest, I will not be swayed by words. I will be swayed by where I see resources and money going, and I will be swayed by the actions that I see, not the words that I hear.
So even signaling intent or value or commitment to fighting climate change, you're sort of past that and done with that?
I would say a lot of young people are, because we have been hearing so much in the recent years about action and then seeing so little of it.
So tell me what you would have wanted to come out of COP26, or what you would want to see from this government.
I want to see our leaders lead by example. I want to see them in their own lives practicing greener things, reducing as well. And I want us all to sort of evaluate our lives and reduce where possible, as well as pick the least harmful solution. I want to see the attitude around it change much more broadly as well.
Yeah. If you could talk to the new environment minister or the prime minister, what would you tell them?
It's only going to get worse from here, and we have an opportunity now to, again, curb what's to come, but it's going to be very expensive.
Yeah.
That is my message. It's going to be expensive. So I would say spending money now on preventing the damage later is the wisest choice.
Okay, Jada Cardinal-Duteuil, thank you for making the time to talk to us. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you bringing some coolness with your hair to the show too.
Thank you.
Okay, take care. Nice to meet you. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, so we are still at this stage waiting for the Speaker's Parade to happen here just behind me. And you are looking right now inside the Senate chamber. We have one of our colleagues, John Paul Tasker, inside there. He says there are about 27 senators there in person. There are 92 sitting ones right now and some vacancies. So there's not a lot of people inside the chamber right now. A lot of people chatting because they haven't seen each other in person in quite some time. And on your screen there on the left is the Chief Justice, Richard Wagner. He is obviously present as well. And I believe the other court justices, they will not be there? No, they will be there. They might be there. They are invited probably, but you'll see a lot fewer people inside the chamber. Normally it would be full, certainly of all the senators, but the middle part would be filled up with seats as well with special guests. And then you'd see the MPs arrive and stand behind the brass bar that is at the end of the Senate entrance, which is where the MPs have to stand. They are not allowed into the chamber to see the throne speech. That, of course, the throne that the Governor General will sit on, Mary Simon, when she arrives and gives the speech. The Prime Minister will sit in that little red chair next to her, and Mary Simon's husband will be there as well, Whit Fraser, longtime journalist that she is married to. So we're waiting for all of that to arrive. The Speaker's Parade will come behind me, the Prime Minister, the Governor General, and as we've been talking about, we are expecting it to be a fairly short speech this time round. My producer tells me the previous one, so just about a year and a little bit ago, was 28 minutes given by the previous Governor General. This one is supposed to be on the short side as well, maybe 20 minutes or so. And again, Mary Simon, her first time doing this, and because she's not bilingual, there'll be a lot of attention paid to how much is said in, she's not official in the two official languages, I should say, not bilingual in the two official languages. There'll be a lot of attention paid to how much she is able or is wanting to do in French, but she is bilingual in her mother tongue, which is Inuktitut. So she will be giving some of the speech in that language as well. All right, as we wait for the Speaker's Parade, and I may have to be quiet quickly in case it starts to happen here just behind me, where the red red carpet is. I'll bring back David Cochran, who's over there in the West Block, awaiting the arrival of the Usher of the Black Rod. Let's talk about this idea that the government put forward itself during the election campaign, David, of the first 100 days and the things that it wanted to get done within that space. I think the government counts the first 100 days from when cabinet was formed, but there are a handful of pieces of legislation that they have put that 100-day marker on. Yeah, and they've got quite an ambitious set of pieces of legislation they want to get through, right? Just to kind of go through them. Some of them are going to be no-brainers. There's an obvious partner to get it through the House of Commons, at least. Who knows what will happen in the Senate? But for example, 10 days of paid sick leave for workers in the federally regulated sector. This is something the New Democrats have proposed throughout the pandemic and accused the Liberals of being a Johnny-come-lately to this when they finally agreed to this during the election. But that should get an easy passage through the House of Commons. Then there's the conversion therapy ban. This was legislation that made it through the House of Commons, but got stuck in the Senate last time, Rosie, and was unable to be passed before the election. So this is something Mark Holland, the government House leader, has said they want to resurrect fairly quickly, and made the point that this has already been debated exhaustively, and in his view should get quick passage through the House of Commons. And then another one that really became an issue during the election because of the ugly sort of tone and nature of things with protests that we saw at healthcare facilities. They want to bring in legislation to sort of criminalize that behavior, the harassment of healthcare workers. We're seeing family doctors who do vaccinations, for example, receiving death threats and harassment. And this is a behavior that the government feels to be unacceptable, most people feel to be unacceptable, and which they intend to make criminal in legislation that they're going to be bringing in, within the first 100 days, this agenda that they set for themselves. Now, some of it's going to be harder to do, Rosie, because it's easy to promise these things to get you through an election. It's harder to get them done and pass through a bicameral legislature when you don't have a majority, and you're going to have some challenges with a potentially obstructionist Senate. Okay, good timing, David. We'll leave it there. I'll come back to you shortly. You can see this is the beginning of the ceremony getting underway now, so I will be quiet and let the Speaker's Parade arrive.
Please be seated. Veuillez vous asseoir.
Usher of the Black Rod, you will proceed to the House of Commons and acquaint that House that it is the pleasure of Her Excellency the Governor General that they attend her immediately in the Senate chamber. Huissier de Bâton.
Usher of the Black Rod, you will proceed to the House of Commons and acquaint that House that it is the pleasure of Her Excellency, the Governor-General, that they attend her immediately in the Senate chamber.
Okay, that is the usher of the Black Rod, who's now received instruction from the Speaker of the Senate on behalf of the Governor General to quickly scoot down the street to the House of Commons in the West Block, knock on that door 3 times and tell them that the Governor General desires their presence inside the Senate, which is when the speech will get underway. That's going to take a couple of minutes because, as we've said, lots of renovations happening here in the nation's capital, and what would have been a walk down a hall is now a walk down 3 city blocks. So as we wait for that to happen, wait for him to get to the House of Commons, you can see the beautiful inside of this building. If you haven't been here before, it used to be the train station in downtown Ottawa and has been beautifully refurbished here to become the Senate. And there is the Black Rod just crossing right behind me there as he heads out on his way down to the House of Commons. So as we wait for him to make his way, I'm going to guess he's going to jump in a car as opposed to jog down the street. I'll bring in a couple more guests to talk about some expectations from this throne speech. Natan Obed is the president of the Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami, and Cassidy Caron is the new president of the Métis National Council. Good to see you both. Nice to meet you, Cassidy. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, good to see you again, Natan. Yeah. So both of you, I mean, it's so interesting that this Governor General is obviously, as an Inuk, is very committed to reconciliation. And this is obviously not her speech, one that she has to read on behalf of the government. But we would expect reconciliation to be a big theme in this speech, too. So I'll ask both of you. I'll start with you, Natan. What are you hoping to hear?
Well, it's interesting. We're collecting throne speeches every year, it seems. And so I'm hoping that we'll still hear about climate, especially for Inuit adaptation and mitigation, off-diesel measures in the Arctic. Hoping to hear about the implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples legislation, which previously was a placeholder for the development of that particular legislation. Of course, murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls and the implementation of an action plan. Also, the continued implementation of truth and reconciliation calls to action. In previous throne speeches, there's been explicit mention of closing the infrastructure gap in Indigenous communities by 2030. Hope to hear that reiterated. The government still has not completed Indigenous health legislation, and that was in previous throne speeches. And also the work on anti-racism and Indigenous justice. Those are areas that we hope to see, and I hope that all of this will be couched in distinctions-based language. But really, we're not looking for a whole new set of things. We're looking for the continuation of the work.
Yeah. Remind Canadians, Natan, what you mean by distinction-based language.
Yes, under Section 35 of the Constitution, there are 3 recognized Indigenous peoples: First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. Each of these recognized Indigenous peoples falls under different legislation, different policies, and has very different relationship with the Crown. And so therefore, it's incredibly important for the federal government to speak in a distinctions-based way so as to be clear and relevant to each one of the 3 Indigenous peoples.
Yeah, be specific rather than general when it comes to these issues. A lesson you've taught me many times. Cassidy and Caron, let me bring in you from your perspective. So you're new in your role. Congratulations on that. What are you hoping to hear from this throne speech today?
Yeah, so much the same as President Obed, but from our perspective from the Métis National Council, we're really looking for government to follow up on those areas from that Liberal platform that support our Métis Nation priorities. So specifically, our number one priority right now is self-government for our Métis governments, our Métis partners across the homeland. So working with the Métis National Council and our Métis governments to implement their right to self-determination. Also, as President Obed said, we're really looking forward to the implementation of Bill C-15 and done in a way that adheres to that distinctions-based approach and honors Canada's nation-to-nation, government-to-government relationship. So working directly with the Métis National Council, with the ITK and the AFN to develop that implementation plan to ensure that it's done in a way that really will create that substantive and systemic change that's needed for our people, our communities. Follow through on the implementation of the Missing and Murdered Women and Girls National Action Plan. We want to see that move forward. There has been a lot of work done through our Métis communities to identify what needs to be done to end violence against women and girls in our Métis community. So we want commitment and follow through on that commitment. And finally, really looking for commitments to slowing climate change. And we hope to hear commitments in working together with Indigenous peoples, respecting Indigenous ways of knowing and being to bring an end to climate change, to slow climate change, because we need to act now. And our Indigenous communities, our Métis communities, we're ready to be partners with Canada in supporting this because it needs to happen now.
Yeah, so a lot of the same issues, but of course specifically different based on your communities. I wonder if you feel a sense of, it seemed like over the course of the summer, certainly after the discovery of the unmarked graves, there was a sense of impatience from Indigenous peoples, also from Canadians who just didn't quite understand why reconciliation is taking so long. Of course, it is extremely complicated and for each community very different. Natan, what would you say to people who are still feeling impatient, perhaps increasingly impatient?
I think Canadians, Indigenous people have every right to be impatient, but at the same time, there has been work that has happened. We are not in the same place that we were 5, 10, 15 years ago. Yeah. And so there are celebrations in that. There have been apologies. There have been large pieces of legislation on Indigenous languages, on the UNDRIP implementation, on children in care, that show us that this country is trying to move forward in a place where it can better respect our existing Indigenous rights.
Natan, I'm just gonna briefly cut you off for this. Hang on.
A message from Her Excellency the Governor General. Un message de Son Excellence la Gouverneure Générale.
À l'ordre. Admit the messenger. Faites entrer le messager.
Mr. Speaker, a message from Her Excellency the Governor General. Monsieur le Président, un message de Son Excellence la Gouverneure Générale.
The messenger. The members can sit down. Entrez le messager.
Mr. Speaker, it is the pleasure of Her Excellency the Governor General that this honourable House attend her immediately in the chamber of the Senate. Monsieur le Président, c'est le plaisir de Son Excellence le Gouverneur Général que cette honorable Chambre se rende immédiatement auprès d'elle dans la salle du Sénat.
Okay, so that is the official request by the Usher of the Black Rod, Greg Peters, for the House to come down to the Senate and hear the throne speech. Not everyone will go, because for some people it's old hat, frankly, but for other people it's also because there's just simply not enough room because of the pandemic. But that's the part we're going to wait for now. I'll go back to my guests, Natan Obed and Cassidy Caron. Natan, I cut you off rudely, but you understand why. I don't want to miss that key moment inside the House. We were talking about impatience around reconciliation, so I'll let you finish your thought on that, and I'll get Cassidy to quickly weigh in too.
Yes. So I'm trying to be optimistic in a place that sometimes is really burdened down by realism. So on the realism side, I think it's been very clear that Canadians demand that the Prime Minister lead by example on reconciliation, and that he put ministerial portfolios that deal with Indigenous peoples and with reconciliation at the forefront of his particular mandate. So it's good to see Minister Miller in Crown Indigenous Relations, Minister Haidu in Indigenous Services, Minister Vandell in Northern Affairs, and then also Minister Lametti in Justice. But really, the Prime Minister has to lead, and I think he's got a renewed mandate on reconciliation based on the last 3 or 4 months of unrest by this country in relation to the reconciliation agenda.
Cassidy, I'll get you to weigh in on that too, in terms of where how quickly it can or should be going right now.
Yeah, so reconciliation is a journey, and it's one that will continue on for years to come. I think that there is a lot that the government's doing with regard to symbolic commitments and symbolic changes to reconciliation. And it's those pieces that both President Obed and I have spoken about, the implementation of Bill C-15, the implementation of the National Action Plan for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Those are pieces, if done correctly and done quickly, will create both symbolic, systemic, and substantive change for our communities. And I think that while we work together with the federal government, all of those pieces will contribute to reconciliation. And we hope to see movement on all of those pieces and continued and lasting reconciliation with the Métis Nation.
Okay, I got to leave it there, both of you. Thank you for making the time and letting me interrupt you when needed. Natan Obed, President of the ITK, and Cassidy Caron, President of the Métis National Council, new president. Nice to meet you, Cassidy. Thank you both so much. Okay, so you're seeing there some of the chosen and few MPs who are going to make their way over here to the Senate building to attend the throne speech. You might have noticed that the House of Commons itself is full, and that's because they have yet to decide whether it will be an in-person parliament going forward or whether they will revert to the virtual model that they had in place through the course of the pandemic. For now, as you probably know and have heard, you must be fully vaccinated to get inside the House of Commons, or indeed where I am, inside the Senate, or have a medical exemption. We've been told that Conservatives, in particular, this was an issue for the Conservatives who either didn't want to disclose who was and was not vaccinated, or had people who were not vaccinated. So all we know is that they're either fully vaccinated or have a medical exemption, because the Conservative leader has said his whole caucus would be around as of Monday, as of yesterday. So those little buses will make their way down Wellington Street here to the Senate, where I am. And as we wait for that to happen, let me bring in the at-issue panel, Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. I'd love to know how many throne speeches you've all done, but I'm not sure you've counted them up, so I won't make you do that. I haven't counted mine either, but it's a lot. And of course, these are very much about ceremony and sort of vision statements and laying out hopes, I guess, and priorities for the government. But they also sometimes have to signal other things, and maybe more so in a minority situation. Chantal, I don't know what your expectations are for today.
Well, unless you're looking for triple vision, this is the third throne speech in as many years from the same government and the same cast of players. So I think if there is anything historic about today, it's going to be about Mary Simon's debut, the first Indigenous Governor General to present a speech from the throne. But as for rabbits coming out of a hat, we've just had an election campaign plus 2 speeches from the throne. So I think we're way beyond the rabbits and into the can we see the actual material, and that is not what throne speeches are about.
No. Okay, so no rabbits, Andrew, but but perhaps some tone suggestions or some suggestions around how the government will operate in a minority government, maybe?
Yes, and you also get some sense of priorities, and I agree that this government's priorities don't appear to have changed, and we'll hear lots about those things like climate change, like the pandemic, like reconciliation, and rightly so. I do think something has changed, though, as we come out of the pandemic, which is the economic situation has changed a lot. We have a long-term challenge in terms of the growth rate of the economy if we're ever going to pay for our social programs going forward. But in the short term, we've also got now the return of inflation, which hasn't really been an issue in Canadian politics or Canadian economics for 30 years or so, but which is back with a vengeance. It may be short term, but it has implications not just for the Bank of Canada, but also for government policy. So it'll be interesting to see whether the government has taken cognizance of that fact and is going to make that a priority as well.
Yeah, we've certainly heard Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative finance critic, this morning railing on about inflation and trying to make it the government's sole responsibility in terms of fixing it as well. Althea, what are you expecting today, either from a tone perspective or from just committing to some promises?
Well, I'm not expecting anything different. I think to Chantal's point, it would be interesting if there was something new in this throne speech that would kind of justify why we had the last election. But if you look back to the previous throne speech, it basically hit on the issues that we just had the campaign on. And the Liberal government has been talking about climate change and reconciliation and making and building a more just and equitable society since, it's been in office, but particularly since 2019. So I don't expect that there's going to be any big surprises. I think what is going to be interesting to note is if there's a clear olive branch to the NDP to try to get them on side. In 2019, the government mentioned that the NDP idea of a dental care was an idea possibly worth exploring. And there was language around pharmacare in the last throne speech. So will there be an olive branch to the NDP or perhaps to the Bloc Québécois? On inflation, it would be interesting to see if the government decides to make a note of something which, as Andrew talked about, Pierre Poilievre has been hammering the government on this for months now, and people are feeling the brunt of that at the pumps, at the grocery store, in the housing market. So those are things that I would say I'd be looking at. And also if vaccination appears, because that was the wedge issue of the campaign. Will that word find its way in the throne speech?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'd be surprised if there was a surprise, because that's not really what throne speeches are for, right? But yeah, go ahead, Chantal.
But it's also that you want the throne speech of a minority government to be, for lack of a better word, as bland as possible. Free of a poison pill. I think on inflation there is a good chance that the government will keep its powder dry for a fiscal update or some sense from the Minister of Finance. So beyond acknowledging that reality, I don't think that is what throne speeches usually have done. As for the NDP, I don't think this throne speech, whatever is in it, is going to trigger a parliamentary crisis. No one is going to be calling for a return to the polls or a change in government in the case of the Bloc and the NDP. What would they be saying? Let's hand power to the Conservatives? I really don't think so. No. But the olive branch to the NDP may be the commitment to pass the sick leave legislation, those 10 days before the end of the year. It's been a long-standing NDP demand. And I think it is something that they have been pushing for a long, long time. So that could be it. The conversion therapy bill that is going to be coming back, this isn't necessarily related to today's throne speech, but to the priorities of what gets done before Christmas, is also something that the NDP is on side with. But if I were a minority government, I would not be giving the NDP a lot of gifts now when I really want to give them Christmas at Easter with the budget.
Yeah, I wonder how the NDP is playing that, though, Andrew. I mean, I don't get the sense. They seem to be full of bluster, to Chantal's point, and perhaps it's feigned bluster because no one expects anyone to, defeat anything. But I wonder how the NDP plays the other side of what Chantal is talking about.
Well, they're not in a strong bargaining position. They are upset, or were expressing some upset about measures introduced earlier or talked about earlier of reining back in some of the pandemic benefit programs, which is essential if we're going to start to repair the finances of the country. So I can't see the government backing away on that, but we've certainly heard some pretty loud noises in that from the NDP. But come back to it, nobody wants an election, the NDP least of all. So it will be noise, but it will not be much more than that.
Okay, I think, I'm going to be quiet for a minute because here's the Speaker's Parade again, the usher of the Black Rod. With a handful of MPs that were chosen by their parties to come to the front there of the entrance of the Senate to watch the throne speech. At issue, Chantal, Andrew, Althea, I'm going to leave you guys there and come back to you after we've heard more. Thanks for setting the stage for us, but we'll talk again soon. Thank you all. I think that was the closest I've been to any MP in about 2 years as they walk behind me here. Nice to see people out and about, even if we're in reduced numbers.
May it please Your Excellency, the House of Commons has elected me their Speaker, though I'm but little able to fulfill the important duties thus assigned to me. If the performance of those duties I should at any time fall into error, I pray that the fault may be imputed on me and not on the Commons, whose servant I am, and whom, through me, the better to enable them to discharge their duty to their Queen and country, humbly claim all their undoubted rights and privileges, especially that they may have freedom of speech in their debates, access to Your Excellency's person at all seasonable times, and that their proceedings may receive from Your Excellency the most favorable construction. Qu'il plaise à votre Excellence, la
May it
Chambre des
please Your
Communes
Excellency,
m'a élu président.
the House of Commons has elected me their Speaker, though I am but little able to fulfill the important duties thus assigned to me. If, in the performance of those duties, I should at any time fall into error, I pray that the fault may be imputed to me and not to the Commons, whose servant I am, and who, through me, the better to enable them to discharge their duty to their Queen and country, humbly claim all their undoubted rights and privileges, especially that they may have freedom of speech in their debates, access to Your Excellency's person at all seasonable times, and that their proceedings may receive from Your Excellency the most favorable construction.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, I am commanded by Her Excellency, the Governor-General, to declare to you that she freely confides in the duty and attachment of the House of Commons to Her Majesty's person and government, and not doubting that their proceedings will be conducted with wisdom, temper, and prudence. She grants, and upon all occasions will recognize and allow their constitutional privileges. I am commanded also to assure you that the Commons shall have ready access to Her Excellency upon all seasonable occasions, and that their proceedings, as well as your words and actions, will constantly receive from her the most favorable construction.
Mr. Speaker, I am commanded by Her Excellency the Governor-General to declare to you that she freely confides in the duty and attachment of the House of Commons to Her Majesty's person and government, and not doubting that their proceedings will be conducted with wisdom, temper, and prudence. She grants, and upon all occasions will recognize and allow their constitutional privileges. I am commanded also to assure you that the Commons shall have ready access to Her Excellency upon all seasonable occasions, and that their proceedings, as well as your words and actions, will constantly receive from her the most favorable construction.
Okay, those are the official requests to have the throne speech read by both the Speaker of the House, newly re-elected Anthony Rota, and the Speaker of the Senate, George Furey. The Governor-General will now be given the speech that she will read for her first time ever. This is the throne speech. Let's listen in live.
Have a good afternoon. Maligalortit, Governor Kikatuktingin. Congratulations to each of you, and welcome to the new parliamentarians who will together with their colleagues make their mark on Canada.
I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. This land acknowledgement is not a symbolic declaration. It is our true history. In each of your own writings, I encourage you to seek out the truth and to learn about the lived realities in First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. Although each community is distinct, we all share a desire to chart a way forward together towards reconciliation. La découverte de tombes anonymes.
The discovery of unmarked graves of children who died in the residential school system shows how the actions of governments and institutions of the past have devastated Indigenous peoples and continue to impact them today. We cannot hide from these discoveries. They open deep wounds. Despite the profound pain, there is hope.
J'ai déjà constaté engagement de la population
Already, I have seen how Canadians are committed to reconciliation. Indigenous peoples are reclaiming our history, stories, culture, and language through action. Non-Indigenous peoples are coming to understand and accept the true impact of the past and the pain suffered by generations of Indigenous peoples. Together, they are walking the path towards reconciliation.
We must turn the guilt we carry into action. Action on reconciliation. Action on our collective health and well-being. Action on climate change.
We must turn the guilt we carry into action. Action on reconciliation, action on our collective health and well-being, action on climate change.
We must turn the guilt we carry into action. Action on reconciliation. Action on our collective health and well-being. Action on climate change. Our Earth is in danger from a warming Arctic to the increasing devastation of natural disasters. Our land and our people need help. We must move talk into action and adapt where we must. We cannot afford to wait. From the grief and pain of residential schools to the fear of threats to our natural environment, to the profound impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. This year has been hard on all of us.
I want to thank all the workers across Canada, especially those in healthcare, for their efforts to keep us safe and healthy, and offer my deepest condolences to those who have experienced loss and loved ones during the pandemic. It has touched us all, including those in this chamber, who lost a cherished colleague just a few days ago, Senator Forrest Nissing.
To her family and to all of you, my deepest sympathies. The pandemic has shown us that we need to put a focus on mental health in the same way as physical well-being, because they are inseparable. As you begin this 44th Parliament of Canada, and as we recover from the effects of the pandemic and build a better relationship between Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples, I urge you to transform discussion into concrete results for us and for our country.
Collaborate with and listen to each other.
Listen to the diverse voices who speak a multitude of languages and who shape this country. Écoutez les nombreuses voix.
Listen to the diverse voices who speak a multitude of languages and who shape this country. Confronting the hard questions will not always be easy or comfortable, and it will require conviction, but it is necessary. The outcome will be a sustainable, united Canada for you, for me, for our children, and for every generation to come.
As we speak, British Columbians are facing immeasurable challenges as their homes, their communities, and their well-being are impacted by terrible flooding. But in a time of crisis, we know how Canadians respond. We step up and we are there for each other. And the government will continue to be there for the people of British Columbia. In 2020, the Canadians did not know they would face the crisis of a once-in-a-century pandemic. But as always, no one should be surprised by how Canadians responded. We adapted, we helped one another, and we stayed true to our values. Values like compassion, courage, and determination. Values like democracy. And in this difficult time, Canadians made a democratic choice. Their direction is clear. Not only do they want parliamentarians to work together to put this pandemic behind us, they also want bold, concrete solutions to meet other challenges that we face. Growing an economy that works for everyone, fighting climate change, moving forward on a path of reconciliation, making sure our communities are safe, healthy, and inclusive. Yes, the decade got off to an incredibly difficult start, but this is the time to rebuild. This is the moment for parliamentarians to work together to get big things done and shape a better future for our kids.
This is the moment to build a healthier today and tomorrow. Priority number one remains getting the pandemic under control. The best way to do that is vaccination.
Already, the government has mandated vaccinations for federal and federally regulated workers and for everyone traveling within Canada by plane, train, or ship. It has also ensured a standardized Canadian proof of vaccination for domestic and international use. The government is securing next-generation COVID-19 vaccines, boosters, and doses for kids from 5 to 11. And around the world, Canada will continue working with its partners to ensure fair and equitable access to vaccines and other resources. To build a healthy future, we must also strengthen our healthcare system and public health supports for all Canadians, especially seniors, veterans, persons with disabilities, vulnerable members of our communities, and those who have faced discrimination by the very system that is meant to heal. There is work to be done on accessibility, on care in rural communities, on delayed procedures, on mental health and addictions treatment, on long-term care, on improving data collection across health systems to inform future decisions and get the best possible results. The government will work collaboratively with provinces, territories, and other partners to deliver real results on what Canadians need. This is the moment to grow a more resilient economy. The best thing we can do for the economy remains ending the pandemic for good. But as we do, we should rebuild an economy that works for everyone. At the height of the lockdowns, the government made historic, necessary investments so families could keep paying the rent and small businesses could stay afloat. Now, with one of the most successful vaccination campaigns in the world and employment back to pre-pandemic levels, the government is moving to more targeted support while prudently managing spending. To ensure no one is left behind, support will be extended or added for industries that continue to struggle. At the same time, the government will also continue making life more affordable for all Canadians. Inflation is a challenge that countries around the world are facing. And while Canada's economic performance is better than many of our partners, we must keep tackling the rising cost of living. To do that, the government's plan includes two major priorities: housing and childcare. Whether it is building more units per year, increasing affordable housing, or ending chronic homelessness, the government is committed to working with its partners to get real results. For example, the Housing Accelerator Fund will help municipalities build more and better faster. The government will also help families buy their first home sooner with a more flexible first-time home buyers incentive, a new rent-to-own program, and by reducing the closing costs for first-time buyers.
Supporting families will make life more affordable for the middle class and people working hard to join it.
The Canada Child Benefit has already helped lift hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty and will continue increasing to keep up with the cost of living. The government will also continue building the first ever Canada-wide early learning and childcare system. By the end of 2022, average fees for regulated childcare will be cut in half in most of the provinces and territories. And in some places, this will even happen as early as the start of the year. Families will save thousands of dollars. 4 jurisdictions have not yet reached agreements on childcare. 2 are territories with unique infrastructure challenges, and the government will keep working together to ensure we meet the needs of the North. The government will continue working with the remaining 2 provinces to finalize agreements that will deliver $10 a day childcare for families who so badly need it. Investing in affordable childcare, just like housing, is not just good for families. It helps grow the entire economy, and so does immigration. That is why the government will continue increasing immigration levels and reducing wait times, while supporting family reunification and delivering a world-leading refugee resettlement program. This is the moment for bolder climate action. Building a resilient economy means investing in people, but the work does not stop here. After all, growing the economy and protecting the environment go hand in hand. By focusing on innovation and good green jobs, and by working with like-minded countries, we will build a more resilient, sustainable, and competitive economy. As a country, we want to be leaders in producing the world's cleanest steel, aluminum, building products, cars, and planes. Not only do we have the raw materials and energy to do that, most importantly, we have skilled, hardworking Canadians to power these industries. As we move forward on the economy of the future, no worker or region will be left behind. The government will bring together provinces, territories, and municipalities and Indigenous communities, as well as labor and the private sector, to tap into global capital and attract investors. Canada will emerge from this generational challenge stronger and more prosperous.
The government is taking real action to fight climate change. Now, we must go further, faster.
That means moving to cap and cut oil and gas sector emissions, while accelerating our path to a 100% net zero electricity future. Investing in public transit and mandating the sale of zero emissions vehicles will help us breathe cleaner air. Increasing the price on pollution while putting more money back in Canadians' pockets will deliver a cleaner environment and a stronger economy. Protecting our land and oceans will address biodiversity loss. In this work, the government will continue to strengthen its partnerships with First Nations, Inuit and Métis to protect nature and respect their traditional knowledge. Creating the Canada Water Agency will safeguard that vital source and support our farmers. And to address the realities communities across the country already face, the government will also strengthen action to prevent and prepare for floods, wildfires, droughts, coastline erosion, and other extreme weather worsened by climate change. The government will be there to build back in communities devastated by these events. This will include the development of Canada's first ever National Adaptation Strategy.
While we address climate change, while we fight COVID-19 and its consequences, while we grow our economy for everyone, we cannot turn away from other challenges.
This is the moment to fight harder for safer communities. While we address climate change, while we fight COVID-19 and its consequences, while we grow our economy for everyone, we cannot turn away from other challenges. Gun violence is on the rise in many of our biggest cities. While investing in prevention and supporting the work of law enforcement, we must also continue to strengthen gun control. The government has taken important actions like introducing lifetime background checks. The government will now put forward measures like a mandatory buyback of banned assault-style weapons and move forward with any province or territory that wants to ban handguns. During the pandemic, we have also seen an unacceptable rise in violence against women and girls. The government is committed to moving forward with a 10-year national action plan on gender-based violence and will continue to support organizations providing critical services. When someone in our country is targeted because of their gender, or who they love, or where they come from, the way they pray, the language they speak, or the color of their skin, we are all diminished. Everyone should be and feel safe. The government will continue combating hate and racism, including with a renewed anti-racism strategy. This is the moment to stand up for diversity and inclusion. Canadians understand that equity, justice, and diversity are the means and the ends to living together. Fighting systemic racism, sexism, discrimination, misconduct, and abuse, and including in our core institutions, will remain a key priority. The government will also continue to reform the criminal justice system and policing. This is the moment to rebuild for everyone. The government will continue to invest in the empowerment of Black and racialized Canadians and Indigenous peoples. It will also continue to fight harmful content online, stand up for LGBTQ2 communities while completing the ban on conversion therapy. Les deux langues officielles font partie de notre
As Canadians, our two official languages are part of who we are. It is essential to support official language minority communities and to protect and promote French outside and inside Quebec. The government will reintroduce the proposed Act for the Substantive Equality of French and English and the strengthening of the Official Languages Act.
To support Canadian culture and creative industries, the government will also reintroduce legislation to reform the Broadcasting Act and ensure web giants pay for their fair share for the creation and promotion of Canadian content. This is the moment to move faster on the path of reconciliation. This year, Canadians were horrified by the discovery of unmarked graves at former residential schools. We know that reconciliation cannot come without truth. As the government continues to respond to the calls to action, it will invest in that truth, including with the creation of a national monument to honor survivors and with the appointment of a special interlocutor to further advance justice on residential schools. To support communities, the government will also invest significantly in a distinction-based mental health and wellness strategy guided by Indigenous peoples, survivors, and their families. Everyone in our country deserves to be safe. That is why the government will accelerate work with Indigenous partners to address the national tragedy of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and 2SLBTQIA+ people. The government will also make sure communities have the support they need to keep their families together while ensuring fair and equitable compensation for those harmed by the First Nations Child and Family Services Program. Reconciliation requires a whole-of-government approach, breaking down barriers and rethinking how to accelerate our work, whether it is eliminating all remaining long-term drinking water advisories or implementing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The government is committed to closing the gaps that far too many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities still face today.
This is the moment to fight for a secure, just, and equitable world.
The last 19 months have underscored that we live in a deeply interconnected world. Canada must stand up on the pressing challenges of our time through our own commitments and by increasing our engagement with international partners, coalitions, and organizations. In the face of rising authoritarianism and great power competition, Canada must reinforce international peace and security, the rule of law, democracy, and respect for human rights. Canada's prosperity and middle-class jobs depend on preserving and expanding open, rules-based trade and ensuring our supply chains are strong and resilient. At home, the government will continue to protect Canadians from threats to our communities, our society, and our democracy. A changing world requires adapting and expanding diplomatic engagement. Canada will continue working with key allies and partners while making deliberate efforts to deepen partnerships in the Indo-Pacific and across the Arctic. Increasing Canada's foreign assistance budget each year and investing in sustainable, equitable, and feminist development that benefits the world's most vulnerable and promotes gender equality will continue to be priorities. We will always stand up for a brighter future for all.
This decade is still young. With compassion, courage, and determination, we have the power to make it better than how it started. But that can only happen by standing together.
Parliamentarians, never before has so much depended on your ability to deliver results for Canada. That is what people expect and need from you. In relation to ending this pandemic, their priorities for this 44th Parliament are clear: a more resilient economy and a cleaner and healthier future for all of our kids. I do not doubt that you will honor the trust that has been placed in you. Members of the House of Commons, you will be asked to appropriate the funds to carry out the services and expenditures authorized by Parliament. Members of the Senate and members of the House of Commons, may you be equal to the profound trust bestowed on you by Canadians, and may divine providence guide you in all your duties. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech and nakokmik.
That is the speech from the throne for this 44th session of Parliament. 32 minutes long, laying out the Trudeau government's agenda for the months and years ahead. A little longer than we expected, but this was the first time Mary Simon did it, so perhaps not surprising it would take a little bit longer. Things will wrap up here, but first let me go right away to David Cochrane, who's over in the West Block, where we've got some immediate reaction from the leader of the official opposition, David.
That's right, Rosie. I am here with Erin O'Toole, the Conservative leader. Mr. O'Toole, thanks for joining us. You've read the speech, you've heard the speech. Is this an agenda your party can support when Parliament gets down to voting on things?
Well, Canadians need to know one thing. There's millions of people in this country being left behind by the Trudeau government and their view of the economy. And they're going to have, the Conservatives had their voice. The inflation crisis was briefly mentioned. Mr. Trudeau's helping cause that. There's energy workers, auto workers, steel, aluminum, people being left behind in this economy, and they need a voice, and they'll have it with the Conservatives.
You keep saying that inflation is being caused primarily by the government spending. Isn't that a little bit simplistic? When you look at the supply chain situation around the globe, COVID outbreaks in manufacturing economies, drought in some agricultural sectors, isn't it a bit simplistic to blame this on Justin Trudeau and their pandemic spending?
No, let's look at that, David. The U.S. has inflation, but their economy is growing. In the last quarter, ours contracted. So we have uncertainty in Canada. We have wages stagnant and costs going up. People are falling behind. You talk to anyone, it's the top issue. This government has no plan. And in fact, they want to put thousands of more Canadians out of work. So we spent more than any other country in the G7 in the pandemic response, and we have the worst outcomes. And he doesn't seem to realize that, and that speech shows that.
But a lot of that money is stopping now. CERB is coming to an end based on what Chrystia Freeland, the finance minister, said. And a lot of the money that was spent paid for things like rent and wage subsidies. These are not inflationary pressures, really. This is keeping things afloat.
Well, there's been a housing crisis for 5 years, and they've talked about it in a few throne speeches. They've made the issues worse. There's a generation giving up on home ownership under this government. So we've seen a recycled set of promises going back to the first throne speech on reconciliation, other issues like that. The same language, no concrete action. So what we'd like to see, a focus on the cost of living crisis, get the country back to work, get expenses under control, and work on national unity at the same time, because Mr. Trudeau picks and chooses who he wants to support.
They mentioned inflation, and their answer to the affordability crisis in this throne speech is investments in housing to make housing more affordable and investments in childcare to make childcare more affordable. What are they ignoring from your perspective? What would you like to see as the first couple of acts in Parliament to deal with this?
We have to get this country working. That means in all sectors of the economy, all regions. There's a labor shortage, yet what they're proposing now is to have more people not working, to pay people not to work.
But
they want to create more programs at a time. They'll have a lockout benefit and a range of other benefits that will encourage people not to work. Every corner of this country is desperate for workers,
But if the city locks down because of an outbreak, you have to support people.
We are past those days of lockdowns with vaccination rates at the levels we're at. We need to get the country working, and we cannot cut off our nose to spite our face. We need to stand up for energy workers and auto workers.
Okay, on vaccination rates and getting things working, Parliament, your caucus, how many members of your caucus aren't vaccinated and have exemptions? Because the Liberals say it's statistically improbable.
As you said, as I said for months, we are good to go on the Hill. We are going to follow the rules as we always have, and we're cleared by the House. It is shameful Mr. Holland is still trying to use division when we always said we'd follow the rules.
Yeah, but the question was how many have medical exemptions? Because the data on the number of people in a population is that it should be a very low number. What is the number in your caucus of 119?
This process is run by the Hill, run by the independent sergeant-at-arms and the nurse and the medical staff here. Mm-hmm. We have followed that. If we want to talk about safety on the Hill, Mr. Holland was the whip who covered up sexual misconduct allegations from young people working on the Hill. So I challenge him to make this a better workplace.
Okay, but until we get an answer on that, people are going to think you guys are hiding something and trying to game the system.
We are not hiding anything. We have every MP ready to go, David, and it's unfortunate the Liberals would still like to fight old battles. We're here to fight inflation.
Okay, Mr. O'Toole, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, Rosie, back to you.
Thanks, David, and thank you to Mr. O'Toole for giving us his reaction right away. As you can hear there, inflation really going to be part of how the Conservatives push the Liberals on the economy. Many economists believe that inflation will sort of fall away after pandemic support has been removed and after the supply chain in the world starts to come up again. We'll see whether or not the Liberals can wait that out. There was mention, of course, in this throne speech about mental health. The federal government created or promised to create a $4.5 billion mental health transfer and gave a minister a new position there. Let's bring in Michel Rodrigue. He's the president and CEO of the Mental Health Commission of Canada. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
So not a whole lot of mention, but I suppose getting a mention is already important. And as I said there are other commitments that the government has made around this because they recognize that mental health is a serious concern for a lot of Canadians coming out of the pandemic.
Quite right. And I think Governor General said it best. Now's the time for action. So now is really the time to increase access to mental health services when and where people need them. Our recovery really depends on it. As a country, we're not doing well coming out of this pandemic. We really need to take care of our people in order for them to be able to participate fully in our recovery.
Just on that transfer, although it wasn't specifically mentioned, the government committed to a $4.5 billion transfer during the election. I imagine they'll follow through. What have you been told around timelines, around how quickly that might get set up?
No real sense yet on how quickly. I think a number of provinces and territories would welcome the additional resources put at their disposal. They have clear plans on where to invest, how to improve access to mental health services. So we're really hopeful they will be able to sign off on bilateral agreements fairly readily, perhaps after Christmas.
Okay, Michel Rodrigue, I'll leave it there. Thank you for weighing in with your viewpoint as President and CEO of the Mental Health Commission of Canada. Thank you. We'll go back to David Cochrane now, who's with the NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh. David.
That's right, Rosie. Thanks very much. And Jagmeet Singh, thank you so much for joining me. You've heard the speech. We've heard versions of this speech, I think, quite a bit over the last several years. A lot of familiar ground. Is this an agenda you think the New Democrats can support in the minority parliament?
Well, my concern is they mentioned cleaner and healthier. On healthier, there's no pharmacare, there's no transfers to the provinces, there's no real commitment to make communities healthier by investing in healthcare. So I don't see how it's healthier. And cleaner, we just were on COP26 where the world is saying we need to end fossil fuel subsidies. There is no mention of ending fossil fuel subsidies. And so it really seems to be slim on ideas. I know it's never meant to be detailed, but it's slim on ideas and a vision. And what was the point of a document like this after an election? It doesn't really show to me a path really to get us through this pandemic into a recovery.
Well, it's the third one in 3 years, right? So, I mean, I guess it's hard for them to keep coming up with new things. They do this so often. But, immediately as Parliament resumes, we're going to see legislation on 10 days of sick leave for federally regulated workers, something you've championed. And we're going to see, the conversion therapy ban and things like this brought back and legislation to stop harassment or criminalize harassment of healthcare workers. These seem like simple things for the New Democrats to support. Am I correct?
There's no question about it. Those are things that we not only support, but we champion. We were the ones that pushed for paid sick leave. So we absolutely believe in that. And if paid sick leave happens, it would be a victory that we've obtained for Canadians, and we'd be proud of it. Making sure healthcare workers are not harassed, making sure we ban conversion therapy. Absolutely. But this document doesn't provide a vision for how we are going to move forward in a meaningful way to provide support and help to people in need, whether it's healthcare or the climate crisis.
Well, I mean, there will be a First Ministers meeting on that at some point, and there is a commitment there on climate change. But you're right, we need to see some details. But in the immediate term, there's already on the order paper legislation from the Finance Minister on pandemic supports. Now, we're going to see the end of CERB, but we are going to see the continuation of supports for hard-hit sectors, for tourism, for hospitality. You've said you won't support any legislation that hurts people. Does the end of CERB become a sticking point for you in supporting the other pandemic supports?
Well, where our sticking point is that there's no alternative. So EI right now doesn't cover 60% of Canadian workers. So if there was a fixed EI, then I could see an end to some of the pandemic supports. There's current clawbacks for people, that seniors, vulnerable seniors through GIS and child benefit. So with those clawbacks and that hurt to people not being fixed, then this is definitely a sticking point.
Okay, Jagmeet Singh, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much.
Rosie, that is NDP leader Jagmeet Singh.
Thank you for that, David Cochrane. I'm going to go back to Hannah, who's still outside, hopefully not freezing to death. You've listened to the speech too now, Hannah. Final thought from you on where we go from here, given that we've already seen certainly the Conservatives not real happy with what they heard, and the NDP open to discussion on some things.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to finding a dance partner on passing some of this legislation that will follow the throne speech, I think the Liberals are going to have to go to different political parties in order to get it through